I love the title of this session. I actually came up with it, so I'll take full credit for it, which is My Teammate is a Robot, the Future of Work Powered by Artificial Intelligence. And it's a little bit of a pun, but if you guys, even today, if you go to an average organization, not just even a government agency, and you find an average person doing a job and say, by the way, we're going to be bringing in artificial intelligence to help you. There's a lot of consternation that comes with it. And it's because I grew up in the 80s, so I remember RoboCop, right? And people start thinking, well, that means that RoboCop is going to be doing my job, and maybe I'm not going to be that important anymore. But what's fascinating is, in two of the discussions earlier today, we heard from Chris Tonjes from the DC government, just heard from Jose Arrieta, and both mentioned this, and they're both implementing AI in practice to drive business outcomes. But in each case, that AI application is augmenting human intelligence, helping employees become more productive, more accurate, scaling their efforts. I'm going to start the first question in each of the organization to start by telling us a little bit about your role, how you see AI empowering your mission, and then one comment about what your kind of future view is in terms of how 5 years or 10 years from now, AI's applications in the workplace will look like in terms of coexisting with the work that people do every day. So let's start with you.
Sure, so thanks for having me. So I lead we call it an ecosystem, but it's a newer office under Discovery Education Affiliate Networks, where we oversee innovation activities within the Veterans Health Administration. So both grassroots innovation that's developed locally, as well as strategic innovation coming from either partnerships with industry or academia, or some of our more sort of forward-thinking and leaning innovations like 3D printing. And to your point, so I look at it, the greatest value proposition we have as society is to eliminate the amount of waste we have in healthcare. So how large do you think the waste equation is? If we look at all of healthcare spending, just on average, how much do you think is actual wasteful spending?
20%.
Any guess? 20%?
30%.
There you go. So the evidence tells us about 50%, right? So we're talking about the largest share of our GDP, and on average, we know that 30, 40, 50% of it is wasteful, right? Non-value added care, in the sense that we sometimes make errors, we sometimes do the wrong thing, and we have a workforce that is overtaxed, overburdened, not literally taxed, but is burning out. Burnout and the rates of burnout in healthcare, particularly in graduate medical education, are increasing. We're seeing increasing rates of suicidality amongst emergency medicine physicians, critical care physicians, and in residency. And all of it has to do, and a large part of it has to do with the requirements that are put on clinicians and practitioners every day. So I was born and raised in New Orleans. I practiced as a student post-Katrina, and we still used paper. Now, I'm not arguing for going back to the days of paper, but it was a lot easier. I wrote my note and that was it. I spent more time with my patients. I spent more time with consultants away from the computer. So healthcare is in dire need to use things like AI and RPA to really advance the efficiency, the operational efficiency of the workforce. I think this is a great topic because there is a lot of potential in healthcare to use and incorporate these emerging technologies to really forecast and move the industry forward. Just a couple of items where I think we're really heading. So about 70% of healthcare outcomes are attributed to behavior and genetics. Now, these are things that are not in the electronic medical record, a lot of where we rely upon data. But we're starting to see pharmacogenomics and genetic data become more ingrained in the electronic medical record. Your phone, each of you who have a smartphone on you, has probably more predictive behavior about your actual health than we have right now in the electronic medical record. It tells me how many steps you took, tells me how active you are. It tells me how engaged you are with society. Facebook's work in their AI nomenclature on suicide prevention is probably going to be the most powerful thing we see, because what is the biggest predictor that we know right now of suicidality and actual committing suicide? It's isolation. So we know that if you're texting all the time, if you're communicating, if I see that you have large contacts, I know that you have a social network around you. So the amount of data that's stored outside electronic medical record both in your cell phone, in your networks. And if we can start to think about the incorporation of genomic data, it's going to open up enormous possibilities of what we see in actual care delivery, really redesigning and reimagining the way we deliver care. So I think it's two things, and we'll kind of talk about this as we go. It's the operational efficiency. It's making clinicians, providers, nurses, whoever it is, more effective and efficient at the amount of work that they have to do, sometimes meaningless, tedious task. And then I think it's also about reimagining care delivery, right? So when you come in as a 65-year-old with hypertension, we're going to deliver the medication that's right for you based upon your behavior, your genetics, not based upon some large randomized controlled trial. And so I think those are really the two forward things that we're starting to press on.
That's fascinating. So a great framework to think about. So on the one hand, using these technologies to gain greater efficiency in things that are already being done. And on the other hand, being able to do things in ways that have never been possible before, right? So Marissa, what are your perspectives on Bureau of Fiscal Management? What do you guys do? Well, Fiscal Service, I'm sorry. What do you guys do, and how does this kind of a framework apply to you guys?
Well, thank you again for having me here. My bureau is probably a little known bureau, but I guarantee it touches each and every one of you. If you get a refund, a tax refund, if you pay to go to a park service, if you ever happen to look at the amount of federal debt that the federal government acquires over time. So my bureau, we refer to ourselves as the heartbeat of the financial management community. Sort of underneath all of it, we provide the infrastructure. Like I mentioned, we auction off the federal debt, make all of the collections outside of a handful of agencies who have somewhat off solutions payments. All of the major payments are made from my organization, over 80%. And my particular organization within our bureau has responsibility for the accounting functions and financial management shared services. So when you think about government-wide accounting, I know it's the most exciting thing in the world to all of you, but it certainly is to us, and it's very, very critical lifeline in terms of sustaining the federal government and making sure that we can produce accurate, reliable, transparent information for not only federal agencies, but also the entire federal American public, rather. So what we do, if I could put it into buckets, we capture information from every federal agency and then produce the financial statement for the US government, schedules of federal debt. Like I said, we do all the accounting on the federal debt to the penny. Cool things like making decisions on how much cash we need to have on hand each day. So that would be our government-wide accounting sort of portfolio. We have shared services, and I mentioned financial management shared services is the area that we have responsibility for. That has to do with, providing administrative services to many federal agencies out there today who want to relieve themselves of that administrative work so they can then focus on their mission, much like you were describing in terms of you want to take that administrative burden off of individuals so they can focus on their mission. That is our mission, right? So we do your back office accounting, payroll, receivables, vendor management, procurement, travel, all of those different things within the Administrative Resource Center, and I have responsibility for the financial management aspect of that. So not only do we do the government-wide financial statements, but for over 60 customers, we do their day-to-day accounting activities for them throughout the year. And then the final piece of what my organization does is focused on data transparency. And this portion is focused, our audience is focused not just on the federal agencies, but more so, I would say, on the federal public, and making sure that they understand how the federal government is using their funds, where it's going towards. A little website called usaspending.gov. Many of you may have heard of that. So that is something we have responsibility for, and we take great pride on, and I commend the speaker prior to this, in the techniques they were using. We did the same type of out-of-the-box, risk-based approach in terms of deploying that that system, and really tried to focus on what was going to make sense to the federal public. When we talk in trillions of dollars, that often doesn't resonate with someone in terms of, well, what does that actually mean in my everyday life? So we really took a lot of focused, concentrated effort to try to make sure the numbers that we deal with on a day-to-day basis make sense to folks. So that, in a nutshell, is what Fiscal Service does, and my organization specifically is focused, like I said, on the government-wide accounting, financial management shared services, as well as data transparency. Now, All of those areas are ripe for RPA, and we have taken this concept and run with it, quite honestly. We started a couple of years ago with the pilot, tried to figure out what this all meant. Again, commend Jose earlier. We were all about, let's not just talk about this in theory and contemplate it on it for a year and then see what happens, in the marketplace. We said, all right, we see this is out there, we need to learn more, let's take our people, get some ideas, pilot it. Did that last year. At this point, we have 30 robotic process automations in production, and we continue to grow and expand on that number each and every month. We've established our own team that's focused on using this automation and developing it for us, so we didn't want to rely on contractors. Again, to your point, and I think we'll get into this, there's very much a need for the public, the FTEs that we have on hand to really work in this space, again, to make their jobs more efficient, take the focus off of the administrative tasks. As a shared service provider, which is where we're using RPA right now, our focus is on the bottom line. The cheaper we can make our service, the more enticing it is to our customers. Not only that, budgets are shrinking, we all know that, and there's not money to continually pay a higher and higher bill. So we are always pressed to look to see how we can reduce our prices, and that's where we started with RPA. So, and I can tell you, after being in production over this last year, going through our first fiscal year end, we're still not the whole way through it, but making our way through it, they saved us. We had cut our staff tremendously, again, because we knew budgets were tight, our customers couldn't afford to pay higher bills. Like I said, we're always just, our incentive is to look to see how we can cut costs. So we've done that really, really well, probably too well. And then when you have, a few people that, decide to have maybe children in their lives, and they were out at fiscal year end. We had a couple of other people who just were not well and needed to be out of the office. So we were down a handful of key resources at fiscal year end, and having those bots in place saved us. So there is real practical application here. We see, in terms of where we see ourselves over the next 2 to 5 years, absolutely continuing to expand in this space. Right now we're in the shared service space, not just in financial management, but in procurement, travel, and HR. We're actually looking right now, actually in the process of trying to expand this to the rest of our bureau, how we can really look to leverage this capability, again, to drive out efficiencies, save money, as well as provide better service to our customers. We are a service-focused organization. Like I mentioned, all of the federal agencies in some capacity or another are our customers. So we want to continue to improve that customer service experience, how we can do that better, how we can focus on that rather than, somebody going through and reconciling a bunch of spreadsheets each day, or, sending out, tasks to, users who need to log into the system or their account's going to lock. I mean, these are manual tasks that we've heard loud and clear from our staff they're not terribly excited about doing, and they'd love to be able to focus on other things. And we've got a long list of projects that we would like them to be doing rather than the standard, very routine processing. So the sky is the limit, I think, here for something that's really easy to get into the marketplace and get up and running quickly. It's been fantastic.
That's phenomenal. So, Bill, Homeland Security is one of the, handful of, I would say, federal agencies that have a very direct-to-citizen interface, right? Mm-hmm. So within Homeland Security, you have USCIS, CBP. You have constituents that you serve directly. The CBP is probably one of the agencies that has the most touch points with citizens in any given day. Right. How do all of these concepts help you become a better partner to American citizens, as well as be better, deliver on the mission better?
Well, that's a giant question. Number one, I just want to say ditto, because if you have to follow Vega and Jose and Marissa, it's tough. Or they answer all your questions in advance, right? So we don't have to sell you on RPA anymore. We have some really great bots going on, but not 30. And ours aren't down to like 5 or 1 second like Jose's. Ours are down to 5 minutes from 2 days. So I thought I was bringing some good stuff. But anyway, so we are nascent though, and we're jumping into it. DHS is 23 different subcomponents of a major agency, many of whom are still following their legacy acquisition processes, and I do IT acquisition and engineering, and at the other end of it, I measure against that to see if the major programs are doing what they should be doing and providing the value for the government, and that's at the 300 million life cycle and above. So all along those areas, and that I have specific expertise, and I will get to your question in a moment. But it's right for RPA, as Marissa says now. So the one thing that we do is we're hand jamming a lot of data from, where the developers are building something. They have to go into this tool. It's an old I won't say what database it's built on, but they're basically having to hand jam the status of what they're doing and putting agile metrics, by hand into a number of fields. And then a person on my staff has to sit down. We have to do this for the Federal IT Acquisition Reform Act on behalf of the CIO. They have to go into this tool and look field by field, page over a couple places, grab some info from that field, basically just ready-made for RPA. So that was our, it's something we have to do to make sure the taxpayers are being taken care of and they're getting the value out of these IT development aspects and systems that we're building. But, I had in one case, I had GS14, took 2 days to dig all the data out, and then another week to analyze it, and then she'd do a report. And that came about once a month. Well, now, through our very first RPA pilot and our team, that's a 5-minute job. So we can pop that out daily, and we can see real time, day to day at least, changes to where we are in terms of building these IT systems. And, when you get down to the user experience, it's when you were talking about a little bit earlier, the title of the topic is a robot's going to take my job, right? It's certainly going to be our partner. Well, nothing succeeds like success, and so this. I tell you what, this raised a lot of eyebrows at OCIO there at DHS, and now we're jumping into a number of other opportunities. And one is our program health assessment process, where we have to validate that all these programs are meeting cost, schedule, performance, technical risk, and technical maturity. And then we give them a little, more or less a FICO score. I'll use a trademark term there, but in terms of what the value these IT programs are bringing. And then, we gather all that data and we put it on paper in front of the leadership, and we say, well, this one looks better than that one. And you kind of say, if one of them has to go away eventually due to the Management Act and compressing all of our systems into one theoretically, if that ever happens. And you don't see too many programs dying in the federal government. But we want to get away from shuffling all that paper and presenting all these one-pagers to a place where we can have a dashboard that pops out red flags. Hey, wow, there's 2 systems doing essentially the same thing. This one's on a mainframe, that one's in the cloud, or maybe there's some other differentiating factors. Which one are we going to keep if we only have X amount of money for one or the other? So that's, in terms of acquiring IT and engineering IT for the government, which is the piece we play at CIO, USC, DHS, that is, there's too many acronyms. We see incredible value in that regard. And one of the other small things I'll just share is that we're still paper-based in terms of determining if a system is ready to move to the next stage of the life cycle. I know Jose and his team are solving a lot of this, and we plan to steal liberally wherever he is. And he's offered that, and we really appreciate that. But, we're reading design documents. We're reading requirements documents, and I've got a young analyst sitting there with a checklist of things to look for, or some older, crustier guy like me who knows what to look for, and going through these documents to see if that IT system is really ready to proceed in the life cycle and to go out to customers. Well, if I can train a young analyst to do that with a checklist, I can certainly train AI or machine learning, to go do the same thing, and then give me a risk score for each one of these documents. Where if I only have X number of hours in a day to look at both of them, a 99 is, I'm going to let that one be, and I'm going to grab the 57 and dive into that a little bit more strenuously. And we've done some initial real AI and machine learning and natural language processing work. We came up with a 42% match against what humans did. And we thought that was, not that good. But then what we realized is that in many cases, the machine was actually being more accurate relative to what we wanted to find out than the humans were. And when you think about that, humans, we all have our own filters, our own life experiences, our own levels of reading, our own levels of comprehension. So we actually found out in many cases the computer was doing it better, the AI was doing it better. So now the thing is tweaking the process adequately so we get the best of both worlds for both of those. But it's lots of fascinating stuff.
40% match is good when humans are 70% inaccurate, right? So that's actually a good thing. By the way, I will mention, it's fascinating stories, but so far all of your robots sound terribly boring. They're like matching up spreadsheets and moving things from one field to another. Where's the jetpack? Where's the flying cars? I mean, this is if this is the future of robotics, this is very depressing. So, but Joanne, let's talk a little bit about from your perspective, how are you seeing, this movement in AI taking hold across the federal government? How are you guys thinking about putting policy frameworks on it so that agencies are not only encouraged to do it, but they have the right tool sets and frameworks to be able to build on other successes? What does the future look like from a policy, governance, and oversight perspective?
Thank you, and thanks for having me here. I'm delighted to be here today. And sorry for those of you behind the poles there. So I work at the Office of Federal Procurement Policy over at the Office of Management and Budget. And we do procurement policy for the entire federal government. We also architect the development of the world's largest buying workforce. So all of us are taxpayers, right? So we're all kind of interested in making sure our dollars are spent wisely. But we have seen an explosion in the acquisition system. And as you heard from Jose and also from you, Sunny, there's a lot of friction in the current acquisition system. Does not have to be there. And so we're looking at it from the perspective of let's get to a frictionless acquisition system. So you have a lot of items that you can buy really easily, but yet we kind of make it hard to buy this simple stuff, right? We don't want to do that. There's plenty of artificial intelligence or tools to help the workforce figure out what vehicle to use, how to set it up, just almost, just amazingly fast, and we're just not fast. Part of the issue out there is that we have a very highly qualified and educated acquisition workforce. So we require a positive education requirement. We send them through years of specific training, and then we send them back to their job and have them do these manual, really boring processes. And those are the kind of things where I really see we can have a spark here. So things like market research, there's so much data out there. What did HHS buy? All the data that Jose has, people don't generally have access to, but it's out there. They should have access. It should be really simple for us to buy tables or chairs or laptops. We're trying to make it more simple with category management. So best-in-class vehicles, that simplifies it quite a bit. But it's the process that I think we're going after now, because the process is bureaucratic. We have rules upon rules upon laws upon rules, and then agencies layer on more information, more bureaucracy to our acquisition workforce, and it really weighs down the process. So we have, earlier in this administration, have encouraged looking at the process, the rules, and cutting out this unnecessary stuff. Just because one time one person did something wrong, then now everybody has to go through 3 more levels of review. Not a good idea. So looking at that, looking at all the very simple ways we can help these highly trained workforce do the acquisition process, help their customers more, get the right outcomes for the mission, which is the most critical part, and then use their talent, their skills to use their professional judgment. If we can get some of these really complex requirements done right up front, all the rest of the process will go smoothly, hopefully engineered by robotics and artificial intelligence. Yep. So we see this as a huge opportunity. We're all in the Office of Federal Procurement Policy really excited. We're all working together and there's, even in our little office, a lot going on. We're trying to come together to make sure we have the plan. What's it going to look like in 5 years? And everything we're doing is driving toward that. So it's a really exciting time in acquisition, and glad to be part of it.
I mean, it really is. I mean, acquisition is the heart of any government process, right? Where IT and acquisition are very clearly linked, but ultimately, government is either providing services or buying, tools, services, capabilities to deliver services back to the citizens. And what's fascinating to me is that artificial intelligence is so like deeply woven into everything that we do every day. Like if you post a picture on Instagram, there's all types of artificial intelligence, mining that data and notifying people and recommending other people for me to follow. And it just doesn't show up like a weird thing. It just looks like, hey, this is a delightful experience for me as a user. Why can't the contracting officer have the same experience when they're about to, pursue a certain kind of acquisition? Why can't relevant statements of work show up and, this didn't work, and oh, by the way, HHS did something similar over here you should look at. That's the kind of experience that will require data, analytics, machine learning, but also these kind of loosely coupled platform architectures that are just difficult to kind of otherwise surface. One of the challenges that I used to have is that a lot of our back-end systems are so brittle that even just the presentation layer, the experience layer, is very hard to kind of build that first-class experience that a person could take delight on, whether they're a doctor or nurse or physician or a contracting officer or law enforcement official, because it's just all tightly coupled, right? A database and a JavaScript and everything is in one stack. So while you guys are not like all driving IT decisions, how do you partner with your IT counterparts to demand better architectures, better outcomes, and how do you set expectations of your own businesses, whether it's acquisition, whether it's medical outcomes? How do you measure those outcomes and tie them to investments that are being done in technology, for example? So we'll take it in any order. Actually, Joanne, let's start with you again. So from your perspective, you're trying to change the acquisition landscape in government. How do you measure it in a way that you can then tie to say, if we made this investment in more better artificial intelligence, better data analytics, then we can see the business outcomes on this side? How do you tie the two together?
I think the best way that we do it is we work closely at OMB on the management side. So we have the performance, we have the IT folks, we have the procurement folks, the financial folks. We're very tightly coupled as we work through this. We have a great leader in Margaret Weichert. She's very, very focused on transforming government. So she came from outside government, and she's just like scratching her head when she say things like RPA, and people in the government go, huh, what was that you said? So she's driving all of this. They have a certain pot of money that has a very rigorous process to figure out, what are we spending it on? What are the impacts going to be? Make sure it's all very focused for this like revolutionary, transformative piece of government in all of these areas. And I think that's critical. The leadership is just critical. And then when you couple the management side with the budget side of OMB, it's a pretty powerful engine. And so that's how we do it.
What's fascinating to me is that for each one of you four, you have each one of you have a different set of constituents, workers, users, experts that are driving the mission that all have, a particular way about them, right? Physicians, procurement people, financial analysts, whether you think about law enforcement, or they all have their own cultures, their own way that they've done things for a long time. And now all of them have to learn this new language, analytical skills, partnering, data, all of this stuff. Like, how do you envision that culture side? So what concessions or learnings does a procurement specialist of the future need to build to be better at their job, to be able to leverage this technology or this world we're about to walk into?
I'm really glad you asked that question, because I'm a 30-plus year veteran of procurement, and up until recently, I felt like the process was about the same in those 30 years. The organizations were set up about the same, and I'm like, how did time pass us by? So things have totally changed. We recently, I want to say 4 years ago, started a new program to teach contracting folks how to buy digital services. And we knew that our current training wasn't adequate to do that. We knew what we didn't want, but we didn't know what we wanted. So we teamed with some good industry partners and came up with an experiential program that people stay in their jobs, but they get together, once every 6 weeks or so, and they actually are immersed into digital services and buying digital services. The outcome was not just that they knew how to buy digital services, but they were just like totally energized in all aspects of their life. They're like wanting to, figure out how to do things differently at home. All the other things they bought besides digital services, they were energized, and that's so exciting. And I think that comes from the experience piece. So I think we need more experiential learning. I think we need to hone our data skills in our field, the market intelligence. Even people like me, I'm not well skilled in data because I didn't grow up that way, but like I'm really wanting to get in that sandbox and try some things out. Like a UiPath personal license at home, I'm thinking, what can I automate? What can I automate on my own personal computer? But it's exciting and it's energizing, and I see the engagement from our workforce.
So let me go to you, Dr. Vega. So similar question, but in your world, you're working with physicians, benefits administrators, people who are thinking about the future of veteran care. How do you engage that cadre of experts into this process of architecting the future?
That's a great question. So I'll give you a little flavor of what's coming in robotics. And she said, that doesn't sound too exciting. There are companies that are taking medical imaging data and projecting it into the real world. So what that means is that we now have the ability to, in a research lab, layer a CT scan, your CT scan, over you.
It's like Star Trek, like that tricorder
I've
thing?
actually put the glasses on. It will layer
that
your
is cool.
CT
Okay,
scan
you win the trophy
on
That's
top
pretty
of you,
cool.
right? I mean, this will fundamentally change the way that we practice medicine, because now any procedure that you require, right now you go into the procedure room, they're shooting a CT scan, they're looking at the patient, moving you see, I'm just gonna layer it over you, and right, it's physical data. So that means that anything in the real world that I put into that field, I can see. So I think there's, in healthcare, we've seen a lot of robotics sort of transform, right? We have, in the late 70s, a lot of cardiac angiograms. So the standard of care now, if you're having a heart attack, is we go through the vein into the heart. Well, cardiothoracic surgeons, they didn't want that. I mean, this was going to massively disrupt their business model, but they're doing very well.
Interesting.
Right? They're not hurting. So if you look at interventional radiologists, this wasn't a field 20 years ago. It's a field today. And so with all of these new advances in robotics in medicine, we get very concerned that it's going to displace a whole group of surgeons or a whole group of entities. The reality is that it hasn't. It's actually made healthcare more viable and better. It's gotten us to be less invasive. You're in the hospital a lot shorter than you used to be. So I think, physicians and clinicians, we rely on robotics today to deliver healthcare. To your point, there's a larger conversation looming, and I think it's more societal because we're having this in the VA, and I think we're going to see this with everybody in healthcare. It's the notion of making data in healthcare more ubiquitous, and this idea of sharing data generally, we're not there yet. We're still very concerned about this idea of taking all of my medical data and just making it readily available to anybody. And particularly on the veteran side, as we now partner with VA and DoD to have a common record through the Cerner transformation of our electronic medical record system, we have enormous computational power. I think that they said Google has a couple of petabytes, which is about the size of the sun. VA and DoD will have somewhere in the order of 1 or 2. So you're talking about data, if we made it physical, that's larger than the size of the earth. There's an incredible opportunity there, but are people comfortable with us sharing all of that data? Is VBA comfortable with us sharing claims data? Veterans are going to say, hold on a second, this might be used against me. For you all, it may be saying, hold on, my insurance company may use this against me. I don't want them to know all of these things about me. They're going to charge me a different set of premiums than this individual because now we've got access to all of this behavior data, this medical data that is private, it's mine. But then if we change the conversation and say, if we could create trust amongst the data use and say, use of this data is going to allow us to potentially cure cancer. There's not a person in this room who's going to say, oh, no, I'm not going to support that, right? So I think that's the conversation we're trying to have, is how do we create access to the data? We know that we can use AI, machine learning. We use robotics every day in healthcare, but it's the comfort with the privacy. It's the comfort with the sharing of data and saying, hold on, no, you can't touch that. But there is a greater societal good. So, it's a challenge.
And is that a human challenge, culture change? Like obviously there's technology aspects to that challenge.
Yeah.
There's things to be figured out, but there's certainly a human aspect as well. It's just a comfort level of, and we went through this like 10 years ago, 20 years ago, like every major even just in technology transformation around when we went from mainframes to client server, people were nervous, and then we went from client server to web, people were nervous, and then cloud, people were nervous. So people just like to be nervous about new things, I guess. But like, but this is now we're talking about actually changing outcomes for patients. That's life or death.
Yeah.
So obviously people need to be nervous about it.
I think a central question that was raised a couple of weeks ago when we were having this discussion internally, imagine the VA partners with Nike, and we get all of the running app data. And I push all that data to the EMR, I can see how active you are. And then Nike comes back and says, okay, well now push us the outcomes data so we can improve our products. Is that the Federal Trade Commission or is it HIPAA? Who governs it? And are you okay with your health system sharing data to a private company for the advancement of, while we think it may be a product and everyone can benefit, it's still benefiting one. And you may not be a Nike fan, you may be a Reebok fan. So I think we have to have these conversations and what's the greater good and the use. And so I think to your point, it's a societal question. It's certainly a cultural shift in the mentality of being open to the idea of large data sets, using machine learning and artificial intelligence and robotics, and what does that mean? The idea of a robotic assisted telephone connection, I mean, when we call your credit card company, right? I just keep pressing 0 now, right? I just want to talk to an individual, right? I mean, could you imagine if you called your doctor's office and you're feeling ill and you're talking to a robot? Press 1 if you're experiencing cough. So we're going to free up folks in healthcare to be with patients more. Robotics can assist with a lot of that, and so. But I think to your central point, these are not just questions for the VA. For healthcare writ large, for us as a society, we're going to have to grasp with what are we comfortable with? And then I think the real question is, how do we create trust within the societal good that the data is being used for some betterment of healthcare delivery and not to the experiences we've seen sometimes.
Right. So we only have a short amount of time left. So this question is for Bill and Marissa. So actually building on what Dr. Vega just said, is it time to start thinking about should we, because ethics and data and artificial intelligence are also linked, right? I mean, if you really are going to take artificial intelligence and take it to scale in any capacity, especially when you're exchanging data, consumer data that you're using as a company or VA data that Nike is using for some greater good, there's always going to be ethics involved. So do we need to have a Hippocratic oath that a data scientist need to take, or do we need to have an ethical framework for managing artificial intelligence moving forward? Who builds it? How do we implement it? How do we enforce it? Just some thoughts on that. A big question, but how do we prevent, Skynet from building Terminators to kill us all?
Well, that's kind of a tough one. So I'm not a data scientist, so I can't proclaim to be a data scientist. And remember, I'm dealing with financial data, so it's all about the bottom line. So to me, I love the return on investment. So I think, though, if you think about what we're doing in the data transparency space within fiscal accounting and fiscal service, absolutely, I think we struggle with those questions in a different capacity, and I think it would be good to have some oversight and some thought into this, because it's different, again, depending on what industry and what the culture is of that particular industry. For us, we'd love to make all of our payments data public and all of our, collections data public and all of these different things, and then all of a sudden it becomes, well, why did this state get all these payments? What about the grants that went to here? What are we trying to say about procurements here from a data perspective and data transparency? Like a lot of the data work that we do is centered around trying to couple different data sets together. And ethically, there's often conversation and question at many different levels as to whether this is something we should be doing. And if we do take on those types of projects, we have to be very careful that we're simply presenting facts and not tainting it in any sort of way. So I know that's something that we put a lot of thought into and question ourselves. I think to have a broader conversation about all of the data that we make available, especially when it comes to the sensitivity of health data. I mean, we have it a little bit with HR data, and we work, very tightly with our security areas in terms of how we use data and whether that's possible or not. But so I think the broader conversation would be a very good one. Again, even though it's financial data, I was joking earlier, there can be huge impacts in terms of what types of conclusions are drawn from the data. You marry together homelessness data with what areas get, federal grants, and all of a sudden you paint a very vivid picture for everyone in terms of, what goes on in different regions in the US, and there's conclusions that are drawn, and industry does different things with that data. So I do think it's a good broader conversation.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I think this is an area that we, smart people are thinking about it, but this is going to be the next 10 years of existential questions that we have to ask and answer as a society, is this intersection of access to data, artificial intelligence, and privacy. This is going to be an interesting set of dynamics that we as a society haven't even begun to. We're starting to see the symptoms of it, right? So a lot of the challenges with Facebook, and we're seeing some of the, the misinformation campaigns. They're all symptoms of who am I, how is my data being used, who's targeting me, for what reason, and influencing my thoughts and how I think. And all of these kind of things we're just getting started into it. So when it comes to financial data, especially the financial health of the federal government, how you can actually interpret, manipulate that information, how you can spin it, how do you make sure that you have full transparency and equal transparency? That's going to be an interesting dimension to explore, I think. And Bill, what are your thoughts?
I mean, I agree. So, I mean, you're always going to have, yeah, there we go. I mean, it's going to be irresistible, the financial pull for this data. And of course, as we all know, the data is the most, valuable thing in the world right now. It's irresistible to folks who make their living by monetizing that. So we're going to have laws. I mean, I agree with the Hippocratic, from the data scientist perspective, that's all great. But likely they're not going to be making the decisions. The folks who, sign the checks are going to be making the decisions, and they're going to be making decisions to get more money to sign more checks. And so, I do think that the lawmakers have to step up and make some rules here. But then they've got to be educated. So it is a crazy thing. Yeah, I don't trust, the more and more I read every day, I don't trust anybody really with my data. But it's out there. So, folks willingly give it to corporations, not the government. So that's kind of an interesting thing. Education all around, I think.
So just to kind of sum up, certainly there's a lot of opportunity with RPA, the amazing work going on, Marissa, in your area. We're hearing similar things going on at FDA, and there's tremendous opportunity across the government for automating the routine. There's increasing exploration of the art of the possible that was just not possible before, like you said, in oncology, in identifying new therapies. Similarly, what the work that NASA is doing, the work that DARPA is doing, there's some really incredible new things happening that just weren't possible before. And all of those are encouraging. At the same time, it's important to remember that robots or artificial intelligence right now is also pretty stupid, right? Because it only reinforces the trends that have happened before. And as an example, I'm sure some of you know about this example where this company, it was like this consumer company that basically collected running information from smartwatches and they somehow got access to a lot of these open source Android type devices and apps to be able to develop a recommendation engine of where are good places to go for a run. And immediately exposed base layouts in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so if you're in Kabul, you might want to go to the American base. It looks like this for a nice jog around the park. And there's some unintended consequences that comes from what seemed like a good intention but leads to some unintended areas. So obviously this is an area where it requires a lot more thought, a lot more careful considerations and expertise, I think, that all of us would love to learn from. So I want to personally thank you all for your insights. We only had a limited time, but your insights were extremely valuable, and we'd love to kind of stay in touch and learn more about how each of you take this idea forward and succeed in serving the American public in a better way. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.